Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're exploring a civilization that pulled off something that frankly sounds almost impossible. We're looking at the Aztec Empire and their incredibly delicate, high-stakes relationship with water. You see, this wasn't just a matter of, living near a river. This was a civilization whose very existence, power, and ultimate survival were entirely defined by how they managed an extreme aquatic environment. It really comes down to one absolutely crucial question. How do you build an empire on top of a lake? I mean, it's a massive geographical puzzle. The Aztecs settled in the Valley of Mexico, which was a region dominated not by solid ground, but by this vast network of interconnected lakes. Just imagine trying to build a massive, thriving urban metropolis where the very ground beneath your feet is essentially water. It's this incredible paradox of survival that they basically had to solve every single day.
Okay, let's dive into this. To understand this amazing environmental paradox, we're going to break our journey down into 5 parts. 1. The unlikely capital. 2. The life giver. 3. The destroyer. 4. Mastering the elements. And 5. The state that water built. All right, let's get started.
Part 1. The unlikely capital, settling Lake Texcoco.
So the Aztec capital, Tenochtitlan, was built directly within Lake Texcoco. Now, normally you'd want dry land for a metropolis, right? But the Aztecs saw something else entirely. Just to picture this, listen to this first-hand account from the Spanish conquistador Hernán Cortés. Now, as critical historians, we always have to remember he was a biased source. But his physical description of the place provides some really vital evidence. He noted that the valley was surrounded by mountains and contains large lakes where boats traveled between settlements, facilitating trade.
Moving on to Part 2. The life giver, weaponizing, and farming water.
Now, what's really interesting about this is that the Aztecs didn't just survive in this lake, they totally weaponized it. They turned their watery environment into a brilliant military and economic asset. Think about it. The surrounding water acted like this massive natural defensive moat. Any enemies were completely bottlenecked, forced across these controlled access points along raised causeways. And if things got too dangerous, no problem. The Aztecs simply removed the bridges, completely cutting off access. Plus, economically, they had a massive network of canoes moving people and goods all over the place, fueling this booming interconnected trade economy.
But, you can't feed a whole empire with just canoes and moats. Enter the Chinampas. These were basically incredible floating agricultural systems constructed right out there in the freshwater lakes. To sustain a really dense population, the Aztecs engineered these artificial islands to exploit their environment for massive agricultural productivity.
And the sheer abundance of crops grown here was staggering. They were growing the absolute staples of their diet, which, by the way, are basically the exact ingredients you'd need for a perfect modern salsa and guacamole. We're talking maize, beans, tomatoes, avocados, and chili peppers. These chinampas were quite literally the floating breadbasket that was absolutely crucial for feeding Tenochtitlan's enormous population.
So the crucial point is, this brings us right to a dramatic pivot. Water was this tremendous opportunity for them, giving them defense, trade, and food. But simultaneously, it was their absolute greatest existential threat. It brought this constant, looming risk of catastrophic flooding, toxic saltwater contamination, and the incredibly glaring irony of having absolutely no drinking water. The very element giving them life was constantly threatening to take it away.
Which brings us to the darker side of this paradox in Part 3, the destroyer, the environmental threat.
Because living on a lake isn't all just serene canoe rides. It's about sheer, unpredictable danger. The geography of the Valley of Mexico held a terrifying flaw. The lakes actually had no natural outlet. So, whenever heavy, sustained rainfall hit, that water had literally nowhere to drain. Water levels would rise suddenly and dramatically, posing a catastrophic threat to houses, infrastructure, transport, and crops.
But the water just rising? That wasn't even the only problem. There was a hidden, honestly even more devastating danger. The northern lakes in this interconnected system were extremely salty. And why does that matter? Well, if that salty floodwater breached its boundaries and poured into the freshwater southern lakes where all those chinampas were located, it would be a literal death sentence for the city. Saltwater would permanently contaminate that agricultural land and completely kill off the crops. A flood wasn't just wet, it was actively poisonous.
And this brilliantly illustrates our 4th section, Mastering the Elements, Engineering Solutions. Because the Aztecs didn't just passively accept their fate and hope it wouldn't rain. They engineered massive solutions to manage their environment. Take the drinking water problem, for instance.
Think about the ultimate irony here. You're living in a city completely surrounded by water, but you can't safely drink a drop of it. Their solution? They went out and identified freshwater springs over 4 kilometers away, and then constructed 2 massive terracotta aqueducts to transport that clean water directly into the heart of the urban center.
But okay, what about the catastrophic flooding and that deadly salt water? Well, to stop that, they built a dike. And we are not talking about some small little wall of mud here. To really emphasize this awe-inspiring scale, they constructed an incredible physical barrier that was exactly 16 kilometers long, built straight through the water.
And it wasn't just incredibly long, it was massive in its width too. We're talking 20 meters wide. This colossal structure was designed specifically to perfectly control those unpredictable water levels and act as a physical shield, protecting those freshwater southern lakes and their precious chinampas from the salty waters of the north.
Let's move to part 5 and see how this builds into the state that water built, innovation and power.
You see, building a 16-kilometer dike is not some casual weekend project. It demands intense, massive collective labor, incredibly complex organization, strong leadership, and some really advanced technical knowledge. The sheer effort required just to manage this water didn't happen in a vacuum. It directly forced the evolution and political impact of a highly organized, powerful Aztec state.
To summarize our core thesis here, the entire development of Tenochtitlan proves that the Aztecs did not just passively adapt to their circumstances, they aggressively transformed their environment. Through those chinampas, the aqueducts, the causeways, and those massive dikes, they literally forced a hostile lake to support a major, thriving urban civilization. These extreme environmental pressures didn't just stimulate new technology, they drove sweeping organizational and political innovation.
So I want to conclude this explainer by leaving you with this final provocative thought. Water was absolutely fundamental to the Aztecs, giving them life, but it also constantly threatened to completely wipe them off the map. When you look at their history, you really have to ask yourself, to what extent did that extreme environmental pressure actually encourage innovation in Aztec society? It's just a fascinating look at the profound relationship between adversity, the environment, and human civilization. Think about that for a bit, and keep exploring.